In the fading light of a late October evening, Sheriff Ethan Caldwell stood at the edge of Pinecrest County's only foreclosure office, his weathered Stetson clutched tightly in calloused hands. The bitter taste of defeat lingered on his tongue. As he watched the county clerk stamp final notice across the mortgage documents for the small cabin that had been in his family for 3 generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm sorry, Ethan, Martha Simmons said, genuine sympathy in her eyes. She'd known Ethan since they were both children running through the pine forests that gave the county its name. I've pushed this as far as I can. Without the Fortune 500 by the end of next week, Blackwater Bank will take the property. Ethan nodded, his face a mask of stoic resignation that betrayed none of the turmoil beneath. At 42, the lines etched. Around his eyes and mouth spoke of years spent under the harsh Montana sun, of losses borne silently, and of a duty to others that had always come before personal comfort. "Appreciate you trying, Martha," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "Some battles can't be won, I suppose." Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and the promise of an early winter as Ethan mounted his aging quarter-horse Cooper. The animal had been with him for 15 years, almost as long as he'd worn the sheriff's badge. Both were showing signs of wear these days. The irony wasn't lost on him. The county sheriff, sworn to uphold the law, unable to keep a roof over his own head. The ride back to his cabin took him past the sprawling estates that dotted the hillsides around Lake Augusta, where the wealthy from back east had built summer homes that stood empty most of the year. Their manicured lawns and gated drives were a world away from the reality most Pinecrest residents faced: the shuttered lumber mill, the struggling farms, the young people leaving for cities where opportunity still existed. Ethan's troubles had begun 3 years ago when his sister Rebecca was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The medical bills had quickly outpaced his modest sheriff's salary, and he'd mortgaged everything to get her the treatment she needed. He didn't regret it. How could he? She'd been his only family since their parents died in that car accident when he was 22. Rebecca had recovered, thank God, and was now teaching at an elementary school in Denver, blissfully unaware of the financial devastation her illness had left in its wake. Ethan had made sure of that, shielding her from worry as he'd always done. As the cabin came into view, its weathered pine exterior glowing amber in the setting sun, Ethan felt the familiar ache of impending loss. This place held every memory he had of his parents, of summer evenings on the porch with his father teaching him to whittle, of his mother's garden that once stretched along the eastern side where wildflowers now grew unchecked. He unsaddled Cooper, rubbing down the horse with practiced movements before filling his water trough and making sure he had enough feed for the night. Inside, the cabin was spare but clean, the kind of place where every object had a purpose and a history. The rifle over the fireplace had belonged to his grandfather. The quilt on his bed was his mother's handiwork. The bookshelf held volumes his father had collected over decades, Thoreau, Whitman, and the dug-eared Zane Grey westerns he'd read as a boy. After a simple dinner of coffee and beans, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills illuminated by a single overhead bulb. He'd gone over the numbers 100 times, looking for some solution he'd overlooked, but the math remained stubbornly unchanged. His salary covered the basics: food, electricity, Cooper's feed, but the mortgage was insurmountable. A knock at the door startled him from his calculations. Visitors were rare out here, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. Habit made him check his sidearm before opening the door. "Evening, Sheriff," greeted Mayor Thomas Wilson, his bulky frame filling the doorway. The mayor's expensive suit and polished shoes seemed out of place on the rough-hewn porch. "Mayor," Ethan replied, surprise evident in his voice. "Something I can help you with?" "May I come in? I have a matter to discuss that might interest you." Ethan stepped back, gesturing the mayor inside with a sweep of his arm. Wilson took a seat at the kitchen table, his gaze briefly taking in the unpaid bills before Ethan gathered them into a neat stack and set them aside. "I'll be direct, Sheriff," Wilson said, declining the offer of coffee with a raised hand. "I've heard about your financial situation. News travels fast in small towns." Ethan's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, sir, my personal affairs are—" "Exactly why I'm here," Wilson interrupted. "I may have a solution that benefits us both." Something in the mayor's tone made Ethan wary. Wilson had always been a political creature, more concerned with appearances and development opportunities than the actual welfare of Pinecrest's citizens. Still, desperation made Ethan curious. "I'm listening. You're familiar with Eleanor Harrington, I presume?" Everyone in Pinecrest knew Eleanor Harrington, widow of the late Judge William Harrington. The Harringtons were Pinecrest royalty, descendants of the county's founders. Their estate, Willow Creek Manor, was the crown jewel of Lake Augusta Properties, a sprawling Victorian mansion set on 50 acres of the most prime real estate in 3 counties. "Of course," Ethan replied cautiously, "Mrs. Harrington has found herself in an uncomfortable position." Mayor Wilson leaned forward, lowering his voice as if the walls might have ears. "Her late husband's law partner, Richard Kensington, has been pressuring the probate court to force a sale of Willow Creek Manor. There are questions about the judge's last will, allegations of diminished capacity when he signed it." Ethan frowned. Judge Harrington had passed away 14 months ago after a brief illness. He'd been in his 80s, but sharp as a tack right to the end by all accounts. The judge amended his will 2 years ago, leaving everything to Eleanor outright, rather than in the trust that had been previously arranged, Wilson continued. "Kensington claims the judge wasn't of sound mind and that the property should revert to the terms of the earlier will, which would allow for liquidation and distribution among several parties, including Kensington's firm." "That seems like a matter for the courts, not the sheriff's office," Ethan said, still not seeing his role in this situation. "Indeed, but Mrs. Harrington has a unique proposal." The mayor paused, clearly measuring his next words. "She needs to strengthen her legal position. While the case winds through the courts, she could benefit from having a husband with an impeccable reputation to help manage affairs. Someone the community respects. Someone like you." Ethan stared at him, sure he'd misheard. "You're suggesting I marry Eleanor Harrington, a woman I've barely spoken 10 words to in all my years in Pinecrest?" "I'm conveying an opportunity," Wilson replied smoothly. "Mrs. Harrington is 73, Sheriff. She has no children, no close family. What she needs is a legal partner, someone who can help protect what is rightfully hers, while providing companionship in her final years." "And what exactly would I get out of this arrangement?" Ethan asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Financial security, for one. Mrs. Harrington is prepared to settle your debts immediately upon marriage. You would live at Willow Creek Manor, of course, and—" Wilson paused meaningfully. "In time, you would inherit a substantial estate. Mrs. Harrington has been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. Her doctors give her 2 years at most." Ethan felt a surge of distaste. "So I'd be paid to watch her die?" The mayor's expression hardened. "I'd frame it differently. You'd be providing dignity and protection to a vulnerable woman in exchange for the security you desperately need. It's a business arrangement, Sheriff, not unlike many marriages throughout history." Ethan rose from his chair, indicating that the conversation was over. "I think you should leave, Mayor." Wilson stood, straightening his suit jacket. "She's offering you $10,000 up front, beyond settling your debts. Think about what that would mean for your sister's future, for your own." "Mrs. Harrington will expect an answer by tomorrow evening. She's hosting a small dinner at 7. I suggest you attend. After the mayor left, Ethan stepped onto the porch, breathing deeply of the night air. Stars pierced the vast Montana sky, the same stars his father had taught him to navigate by, saying a man who knows the stars is never truly lost. Right now, Ethan felt more lost than he ever had. The proposition was distasteful, borderline offensive. Yet as the night deepened and sleep eluded him, Ethan found himself considering it from every angle. Would it be so different from the other compromises he'd made in life? He'd become sheriff not out of ambition, but because Pinecrest needed someone honest after the last sheriff was caught taking bribes from lumber companies. He'd put his own dreams of ranching on hold to care for Rebecca. His entire life had been a series of choices made for others' benefit. And what would happen if he lost the cabin? Where would he go? What would he tell Rebecca? The thought of his sister's face when she learned he'd lost their family home because of her medical bills was unbearable. By dawn, exhaustion and practicality had worn down his initial moral outrage. He would at least meet Eleanor Harrington, hear what she had to say for herself. There was no commitment in a conversation. Willow Creek Manor stood atop a gentle rise overlooking Lake Augusta. It's Victorian. Turrets and wraparound porches, a testament to a bygone era of wealth and craftsmanship. As Ethan guided his department-issued truck up the long gravel drive the following evening, the setting sun cast the white clapboard in shades of gold and amber. Gardeners were tending to immaculate flower beds, and lights glowed warmly from within. The mansion. Ethan had traded his uniform for his only suit, a navy blue affair he wore for funerals and the occasional wedding. He'd polished his dress shoes and trimmed his beard, feeling awkward and out of place before he even reached the front door. A silver-haired butler admitted him, leading him through an entrance hall adorned with oil paintings and antique furniture that probably cost more than he'd earned in his entire career. The house smelled of beeswax polish, fresh flowers, and something delicious cooking. "The sheriff, madam," the butler announced as he ushered Ethan into a formal sitting room where Eleanor Harrington waited. Ethan had seen Eleanor around town over the years, but always at a distance. Up close, she was more striking than he'd expected. Tall and straight-backed, despite her 73 years, she had silver hair swept into an elegant knot and remarkable hazel eyes that assessed him with unmistakable intelligence. She wore a simple but clearly expensive burgundy dress and a single strand of pearls at her throat. "Sheriff Caldwell," she said, her voice rich and cultured, with the slight accent of old New England money. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. Please sit." Mayor Wilson and a man Ethan recognized as Dr. James Peterson, Pinecrest's most prominent physician, were already seated with cocktails in hand. Ethan took the offered armchair across from Eleanor, declining the drink the butler offered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I prefer clarity of mind for important conversations," he explained, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly. A slight smile touched her lips. "An admirable quality. One I share." She dismissed the butler with a polite nod. "Dinner will be ready shortly. Gentlemen, but first I believe Sheriff Caldwell and I have matters to discuss privately." Wilson and Dr. Peterson exchanged glances before obediently withdrawing to the terrace visible through French doors. Eleanor waited until they were out of earshot before speaking again. "I imagine Mayor Wilson has already outlined my proposition in his characteristically blunt manner," she said, studying Ethan with those penetrating eyes. "He has," Ethan confirmed, "though I'd prefer to hear it from you directly." "Fair enough." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap, her posture impeccable. "I require a husband, Sheriff Caldwell, not for romantic purposes. At my age, such notions are long past, but for legal protection and companionship as I navigate a rather unpleasant battle for what is rightfully mine." The dispute with Judge Harrington's former partner, Ethan said. Yes, Richard Kensington was my husband's colleague for 40 years, but friendship meant little once William was gone. Richard believes he is entitled to a portion of Willow Creek, despite William's clear wishes to the contrary. A flash of steel entered her voice. I will not see this home dismantled, Sheriff, not while I draw breath. And where do I fit into this? Ethan asked, though the answer was becoming clearer. You have a reputation for integrity in this country. People respect you. As my husband, your presence would strengthen my position considerably. Richard's claims about William's mental capacity would seem far less credible if a man of your standing chose to align himself with me. She paused. In return, I offer financial security. Your debts would be settled immediately. You would have a comfortable home here at Willow Creek for as long as you wish it. And after you're gone, Eleanor didn't flinch at the direct question. I've been forthright with my doctors about sharing my prognosis. My heart is failing, Sheriff. I have perhaps 2 years. Upon my death, assuming our arrangement remains intact, you would inherit 1/3 of my estate, including this house if you wish to keep it. The remaining portions go to the Pinecrest Historical Society and to fund scholarships for local students. The practicality with which she discussed her own mortality was unsettling, but commanded a certain respect. This would be a marriage in name only, Ethan clarified. Legally binding, but private in nature. You would have your own suite of rooms in the East Wing. I would expect discretion, loyalty, and your assistance with managing certain affairs as my health declines. Beyond that, your time would be your own. I could continue as sheriff, of course. Your work is part of what makes you valuable in this arrangement. She regarded him thoughtfully. I don't offer this lightly, Sheriff Caldwell. I've observed you over the years. You're a man who honors his commitments, who places duty above personal gain. These are rare qualities. Ethan stood, moving to the window that overlooked the immaculate grounds. The setting sun gilded the surface of Lake Augusta in the distance. This world of wealth and privilege was so far removed from his reality that it felt like stepping into a dream. Why me? He asked finally, turning back to face her. There must be dozens of men who would jump at this opportunity, men with more social standing, more experience in your world. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Because those men would want Willow Creek, not its caretaker. They would count the days until my death, already planning how to spend their inheritance. She rose with careful dignity, crossing to stand before him. You need what I'm offering, Sheriff. That's clear enough. But you don't crave it. There's a significant difference. Before Ethan could respond, the butler appeared at the doorway. Dinner is served, madam. Thank you, Harrison. Eleanor turned to Ethan. Shall we join the others? You needn't decide tonight. I'll expect your answer by noon tomorrow. Dinner passed in a blur of fine china, crystal glassware, and conversation that carefully avoided the real purpose of their gathering. Dr. Peterson discussed the unseasonably cold weather. The mayor spoke at length about development plans for the lakefront. Eleanor presided over it all with practiced grace, the perfect hostess, even as Ethan noticed the subtle signs of fatigue in the tightening around her eyes and the careful way she regulated her movements. After dessert, as Ethan prepared to leave, Eleanor walked him to the door herself, dismissing the butler with a gentle nod. One more thing, Sheriff, she said as they stood in the grand entryway. If you accept my proposal, we will be married by Judge Carlton the day after tomorrow. I don't believe in prolonged engagements at my age. The directness startled a smile from him. No, I suppose there's little point in that. Think carefully tonight, she advised. Once made, this decision cannot be easily unmade. Good night, Sheriff Caldwell. The drive back to his cabin gave Ethan time to think, the truck's headlights carving a path through the darkness as he weighed his options. By the time he arrived home, his decision was made, though he slept little that night, questioning and reaffirming his choice until dawn painted the eastern sky. At precisely noon the next day, Ethan parked in front of Willow Creek Manor. Harrison admitted him without comment, leading him once again to the sitting room where Eleanor waited, a book open in her lap. "Sheriff," she greeted him, closing her book and setting it aside. "You've reached a decision." Ethan removed his hat, holding it before him. "I have, Mrs. Harrington. I accept your proposal." Eleanor nodded, as if she'd expected nothing less. "Very good. Judge Carlton will be here at 10 tomorrow morning. I've taken the liberty of having papers drawn up regarding the financial arrangements. You're welcome to have your own attorney review them." Ethan thought of the foreclosure notice, of Rebecca's future, of the cabin that had been his family's, anchor for generations. "That won't be necessary. I trust you'll be fair." "A risk in any arrangement," Eleanor remarked, "but in this case, not misplaced." She rose, extending her hand. "Until tomorrow, then." As they shook hands, Ethan was struck by the strength in her grip, the clarity in her gaze. Whatever else this unusual union might be, he suspected it would not be boring. 24 hours later, in the sunlit conservatory of Willow Creek Manor, Ethan Caldwell became the second husband of Eleanor Harrington in a ceremony witnessed only by Mayor Wilson, Dr. Peterson, and Harrison the butler. The vows were traditional, though their arrangement was anything but. As he slipped a simple gold band onto Eleanor's finger, her late husband's wedding ring placed in safekeeping the day before, Ethan wondered what strange path he had set himself upon, and what secrets lay waiting to be discovered within the walls of Willow Creek Manor. The morning after the ceremony, Ethan woke in an unfamiliar bed. Sunlight streamed through tall windows draped in burgundy velvet, illuminating a bedroom larger than his entire cabin. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then reality flooded back. The wedding, the papers he'd signed, the business-like handshake with Eleanor, before Harrison had shown him to the East Wing suite that would now be his quarters. He sat up, taking in his surroundings properly. The four-poster bed was crafted of dark mahogany, the mattress more comfortable than any he'd ever slept on. A writing desk stood near the window overlooking manicured gardens. A fireplace with an ornate marble mantel dominated one wall, flanked by bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Through an open door, he glimpsed a private bathroom, with fixtures that gleamed with brass and porcelain opulence. This wasn't just wealth, it was old money, the kind that accumulated over generations, and settled into the very foundations of a place. Ethan felt like an intruder, a sentiment that wasn't helped by the fact that his few belongings, 2 suitcases of clothes, his father's pocket watch, a box of family photographs, and a few books, looked pathetically inadequate when set against such grandeur. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, hastily pulling on his robe over his pajamas. Harrison entered, carrying a silver tray. "Good morning, sir. Mrs. Harrington," that is Mrs. Caldwell now, though she has expressed a preference to maintain her previous name for simplicity's sake, "thought you might appreciate breakfast in your rooms this first morning while you acclimate." The butler set the tray on a small table near the window. It held a silver coffee pot, a covered plate, and a folded newspaper. "Mrs. Harrington typically breakfasts at 8 in the morning room, should you wish to join her in the future. She will be occupied with her correspondence until 11, after which she would welcome your company in the library to discuss household matters." "Thank you, Harrison," Ethan said, still unused to being served. "And please, call me Ethan, or you, Sheriff, if that's more comfortable." Harrison's expression remained professionally neutral. "As you wish, Sheriff. Mrs. Harrington has arranged for a tailor to visit this afternoon. She mentioned that you might require appropriate attire for certain social obligations." After the butler departed, Ethan poured himself coffee and lifted the silver dome to reveal perfectly cooked eggs, bacon, and toast. The newspaper was the Pinecrest Gazette, folded to an article announcing his marriage to Eleanor Harrington in terms that managed to convey surprise without descending into gossip. By the time Ethan had showered, dressed, and found his way through the labyrinthine corridors to the library, he felt more like himself. He'd chosen to wear his uniform, a deliberate reminder of who he was, beyond these walls. The library was a two-story affair with a spiral staircase connecting upper and lower levels. Floor-to-ceiling shelves housed thousands of books, their spines forming a tapestry of colors and textures. A massive oak desk occupied one corner, while comfortable leather chairs were arranged near a stone fireplace where flames crackled despite the mild autumn day. Eleanor sat at the desk, a ledger open before her. She looked up as he entered, appraising him with that direct gaze that seemed to miss nothing. "Ah, Sheriff, I trust you slept well." She wore a simple navy dress, her silver hair arranged in its usual elegant style, a single strand of pearls at her throat. "Better than I have in years," Ethan admitted, taking the chair she indicated near the desk. "Thank you for the breakfast." "Harrison has been with me for 30 years. He takes great pride in his responsibilities." She closed the ledger and folded. Her hands stopped. "I thought we might discuss the practical aspects of our arrangement, now that the legal formalities are complete." "That seems wise." Eleanor opened a drawer and removed a small ring of keys, sliding them across the desk to him. "These will give you access to the main areas of the house, as well as the garage. There are 4 vehicles at your disposal. The Coom Bentley, which Harrison drives when I require formal transportation, a Range Rover, a Jeep for inclement weather, and William's old Ford pickup, which you might find suitable for everyday use." Ethan took the keys, their weight symbolic of the responsibility he'd assumed. "I appreciate that." "Your financial obligations have been addressed as promised," she continued, handing him a folder. "Inside you'll find documentation of the settlement, with Blackwater Bank regarding your property, as well as the establishment of a personal account in your name at First Montana Trust with an initial deposit of $10,000 as agreed." Ethan opened the folder, confirming that the foreclosure proceedings on his cabin had indeed been halted. The property was now free and clear of all debt. The bank statement showing his new account balance made his breath catch, more money than he'd ever had at one time. "I've also taken the liberty of arranging for a monthly stipend of $2,000 to cover personal expenses. This is separate from household accounts, which Harrison manages for general upkeep and staff salaries." She paused, studying his reaction. "Is this satisfactory?" "More than generous," Ethan said, closing the folder. "Though I want to be clear that I intend to continue drawing my sheriff's salary. I won't be kept." A hint of approval flickered in Eleanor's eyes. "I expected nothing less. Your independence is one of the qualities that made you suitable for this position." "Position," Ethan repeated, the word highlighting the transactional nature of their union. "I suppose that's accurate enough. I prefer clarity to comforting." "Viction, Sheriff, we both know why we're here." She rose, moving to a large map of Pinecrest County mounted on the wall. "Now, to the immediate matter at hand. Richard Kensington has filed new motions in probate court challenging William's will. He's specifically targeting the amendments made 2 years ago that left Willow Creek entirely to me." Ethan joined her at the map, noting that Willow Creek's boundaries were outlined in red. "On what grounds?" "He claims William was already exhibiting signs of cognitive decline when he made the changes. He's gathered affidavits from several associates suggesting my husband was forgetful, confused about dates and appointments." Her voice remained steady, but Ethan detected an undercurrent of anger. "It's nonsense, of course. William had a remarkable mind right until the pneumonia took him. He could recall details from cases he tried 40 years ago." "I didn't know the judge well," Ethan said carefully, "but his reputation was that of a sharp legal mind. I never heard rumors of declining capacity, because there was none. Eleanor's finger traced the property line where Willow Creek bordered lake frontage. What Richard truly wants is this section here. 15 acres of prime lakefront that would be worth millions to developers. William refused multiple offers over the years. He was committed to preserving the natural shoreline. And you share his commitment. She turned to face him fully. Willow Creek has been in William's family for 5 generations, Sheriff. It's more than real estate. It's a legacy. I intend to honor that legacy through the Harrington Foundation, which will maintain this property as a nature preserve and historical site after I'm gone. The passion in her voice surprised him. This wasn't merely about wealth or status. She genuinely cared about preserving something she believed valuable. "Where do I fit into this fight?" he asked. "Your presence provides a counter-argurative to Richard's claims. A man of your position wouldn't align himself with someone of questionable judgment or integrity. Additionally, as my husband, you now have legal standing to represent my interests in certain contexts." She moved to the desk and pressed a button. Moments later, Harrison appeared with a tea service. "There's a charity gala at the Pinecrest Country Club this Saturday," Eleanor continued as Harrison poured tea. "The proceeds benefit the county hospital. Richard serves on the hospital board and will certainly attend. It will be our first public appearance as a married couple, an opportunity to establish the narrative we wish to present, which is a union based on mutual respect and shared values. Nothing flashy or romantic that would only fuel rumors, but a dignified partnership that makes sense to those who know us." She accepted a cup from Harrison with a murmured thank you. "The tailor will ensure you have appropriate evening attire." After Harrison withdrew, Ethan sipped his tea thoughtfully. "What else should I know about Kensington? What kind of man am I dealing with?" Eleanor considered this. "Richard is intelligent, methodical, and utterly convinced of his own rightness. He and William were law partners for 4 decades, though their approaches differed significantly. William saw the law as a framework for justice. Richard sees it as a tool for achieving desired outcomes. He's well connected politically and socially. Sounds formidable. He is." She set down her cup. "But he underestimates me. Most men do." Something in her tone, a blend of resignation and steel, made Ethan look at her more closely. Behind the cultured exterior and social graces, he glimpsed a woman who had navigated a man's world with more skill than she'd ever been credited for. "I won't make that mistake," he said simply. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, I don't believe you will." She glanced at the ornate clock on the mantel. "You'll want to check in at your office. I've had Harrison prepare the Jeep for your use. The staff has been informed of our arrangement in general terms. They're discreet and loyal. Most have been with Willow Creek for years." Ethan nodded, recognizing the graceful dismissal. "I'll return for dinner." 6:30 in the dining room, she confirmed. "And Sheriff, thank you for your candor this morning. I believe this arrangement will serve us both well." As Ethan drove the well-maintained Jeep into town, he was struck by the surreal contrast between his morning at Willow Creek and the familiar routines of Pinecrest. The sheriff's office was a modest brick building on Main Street, housing his small department of 3 deputies, a dispatcher, and a part-time clerk. Marge Donnelly, the dispatcher who had run the office with terrifying efficiency for 20 years, looked up as he entered. Her eyebrows rose at the sight of him. Well, if it isn't the new Mr. Harrington," she said, her tone making it clear that news had traveled fast. "It's still Caldwell, Marge," he replied evenly, accepting the stack of messages she thrust toward him. "And I'm still Sheriff." She studied him over her reading glasses. "Any particular reason you didn't mention you were courting the judge's widow? Or did that detail slip your mind during our daily check-ins?" Ethan sighed. He'd known the questions would come, but he'd hoped for a little more time to prepare his responses. It was a private matter until it wasn't. Private enough that even your deputies were blindsided by the news. Donovan nearly choked on his coffee when Mrs. Henderson from the post office came in talking about wedding announcements. "I'll speak with them," Ethan promised, moving toward his office. "Any emergencies while I was handling personal matters?" Marge snorted at the euphemism, but allowed the subject change. Vandalism at the high school, 2 fender benders by the supermarket, and the usual complaint from Old Man Jenkins about teens on his property. Donovan and Rivera handled it all. Oh, and that lawyer from Meridian City called again about the Wilkins case depositions. Ethan spent the next few hours catching up on paperwork and meeting with his deputies, addressing their questions about his sudden marriage with as much honesty as the situation allowed. He emphasized that nothing would change in terms of his commitment to the department or the community, a promise that seemed to satisfy them, though he caught them exchanging glances when they thought he wasn't looking. By mid-afternoon, he'd fallen back into the rhythm of his job, reviewing reports, signing off on routine matters, discussing patrol schedules. The familiar work grounded him, a reminder that despite the dramatic upheaval in his personal circumstances, his identity remained intact. He was reviewing the monthly budget when a knock at his open door made him look up. Richard Kensington stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly salary. "Sheriff Caldwell," Kensington said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Ethan rose, instantly alert. "Mr. Kensington, what brings you to the sheriff's office?" "Professional courtesy," Kensington replied, entering without invitation and taking a seat. He was in his early 70s, with silver hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to deference. "I thought we should meet, given your new position in the community." "My position hasn't changed," Ethan said, remaining standing. "I'm still Pinecrest Sheriff." Among other things, Kensington's gaze was assessing. "Your marriage to Eleanor was unexpected, quite the whirlwind romance from what I hear. Mrs. Harrington and I prefer to keep our personal affairs private. Admirable, though difficult in a town this size." Kensington leaned back, studying Ethan with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent decades evaluating witnesses. "I knew Judge Harrington for 40 years, Sheriff. He was a brilliant jurist and a dear friend. His decline in those final years was painful to witness. So I've heard." "From you, primarily," Ethan remarked. A flicker of annoyance crossed Kensington's face before his smooth veneer returned. "You've only heard Eleanor's version, I'm afraid. There are medical records, testimony from William's doctor, evidence that paints a more complete picture, evidence that might suggest why his final amendments to his will were so uncharacteristic. If you have concerns about the will, the proper venue is the probate court, not my office." "Indeed, and that process is underway." Kensington stood, adjusting his cuffs. "I merely wanted to introduce myself properly and perhaps offer some friendly advice. Eleanor Harrington is a formidable woman with many admirable qualities, but she guards her secrets carefully. You might want to explore Willow Creek thoroughly, especially the West Wing study. William kept his most important papers there." The specificity of the suggestion caught Ethan's attention. "Is there something particular you think I should know?" Kensington smiled, a practiced expression that revealed nothing. "Let's just say that marriages should be built on honesty, Sheriff. I wonder how much Eleanor has shared about her past, or about the true nature of her relationship with William." He moved toward the door. "I look forward to seeing you both." At the hospital gala, Eleanor never misses an opportunity to maintain appearances. After Kensington departed, Ethan remained at his desk, turning over the encounter in his mind. The lawyer's visit had been deliberate, a reconnaissance mission to assess Ethan's loyalty and perhaps plant seeds of doubt. The specific mention of the West Wing study felt like bait, but whether it was merely a ploy or a genuine lead remained to be seen. By the time Ethan returned to Willow Creek that evening, the property had transformed in the gathering dusk. Lights glowed from windows, casting warm rectangles on the manicured lawn. A groundskeeper was lighting decorative lanterns along the main drive. The mansion looked like something from another era, beautiful and imposing against the twilight sky. Harrison met him at the door, taking his hat and jacket with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Harrington is in the music room, sir. She asked that you join her when you return." Ethan followed the butler through corridors he was still learning to navigate. The music room turned out to be a spacious chamber dominated by a grand piano, its walls adorned with paintings of orchestras and opera scenes. Eleanor sat in a wingback chair near tall windows, overlooking the rose garden, a book open in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Sheriff, how was your day?" The question was surprisingly domestic, almost as if they were a normal couple. "Informative," he replied, taking the chair opposite hers. "Richard Kensington paid me a visit at my office." Eleanor's expression sharpened. "Did he? That was predictably swift. What did he want? To size me up, and to suggest that I might find interesting documents in the West Wing study." She removed her glasses, setting them and her book aside. "I see. And did he specify what these documents might reveal?" "No, but he hinted at secrets about your past and your relationship with the judge." Ethan studied her carefully. "Is there something I should know, Eleanor?" For a long moment she was silent, her gaze moving to the darkening garden beyond the windows. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured. "Richard is attempting to unsettle you, to create discord between us. It's a tactic he's employed before." She turned back to him. "There are aspects of my history that aren't common knowledge in Pinecrest, not secrets so much as private matters that never required public airing. In time, I'll share what's relevant. And the West Wing study was William's private domain. I've preserved it as he left it out of respect." She rose with careful dignity. "I haven't entered it since his death. Perhaps it's time that changed. After dinner, if you're amenable." Something in her tone suggested this was a significant concession, a boundary being cautiously adjusted. "I'd appreciate that," Ethan said, rising as well. "Dinner should be ready," she said, moving toward the door. "Mary has prepared trout almondine. I mentioned it was one of your favorites." The fact that she'd taken the trouble to learn his preferences, and that she was correct about his fondness for trout, caught him off guard. "Thank you," he said simply. As they walked to the dining room together, Ethan was acutely aware that beyond the financial transaction that had brought them together, beyond the legal battle with Kensington, he and Eleanor were now engaged in something more nuanced, the careful construction of a partnership that neither had anticipated needing. And somewhere within the walls of Willow Creek Manor, perhaps in the West Wing study they would visit after dinner, waited answers to questions he hadn't yet formulated. Truths about the woman who was now his wife, secrets that others believed valuable enough to fight for, and the legacy of a judge whose final wishes had set this strange journey in motion. Dinner was a quiet affair, served in a dining room where portraits of Harrington ancestors gazed down from paneled walls. The antique china, the crystal goblets, the silver candlesticks, everything spoke of history and permanence. Ethan found himself wondering how many conversations these walls had witnessed, how many secrets they held. Eleanor ate sparingly, but with appreciation, complimenting the chef's preparation of the trout. She maintained light conversation, asking about Ethan's workday beyond Kensington's visit. Her genuine interest in Pinecrest's daily operations surprised him. She knew details about county issues he wouldn't have expected from someone in her position. "You're well informed about local matters," he observed, as Harrison cleared their dessert plates. William believed civic engagement was essential, regardless of one's station, Eleanor replied. We made a habit of discussing county affairs over dinner. I find I miss those conversations. There was a softness to her tone when she mentioned her late husband that Ethan hadn't heard before. It reminded him that beneath the practical businesswoman who had proposed their arrangement was a widow who had lost her companion of many years. After coffee, Eleanor led the way through the house toward the West Wing. Unlike the East Wing, where Ethan's quarters were located, this section of Willow Creek felt less trafficked, the air slightly musty despite the evident care with which it was maintained. Harrison ensures the rooms are dusted and aired weekly, Eleanor explained, as if sensing his thoughts, but the staff knows this area is private. They stopped before double doors of dark oak. Eleanor withdrew a small key from her pocket, hesitating briefly before inserting it into the lock. The mechanism turned with a decisive click. "I haven't been in here since the day after William died," she said quietly, pushing the doors open. "I found I couldn't bear it then." The study beyond was a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, though now they showed only darkness and the occasional reflection of the room's lights. Bookshelves lined two walls, filled with legal volumes and historical texts. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface ordered and clean. A leather armchair sat behind it, and two smaller chairs faced it across the expanse of polished wood. Ethan noticed immediately that the room didn't feel abandoned. There was no dust cover on the desk, no sense of a space frozen in time. "Someone's been maintaining this room," he observed. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, moving to the desk. "I asked Harrison to preserve it exactly as William kept it. He comes in weekly to ensure everything remains in its proper place." She ran her fingers lightly over the disk's surface. William was meticulous about his papers. Each drawer was designated for specific types of documents. "Personal correspondence here," she indicated the top right drawer. "Legal matters here, the top left, and financial affairs in this one, a deeper drawer on the right side." "What did Kensington think I would find?" Ethan asked, watching as she moved around the desk with the familiarity of someone who had spent many hours in this room. Let's see what he believed was important enough to mention specifically. Eleanor opened the middle drawer of the desk and removed a small brass key. She moved to a cabinet set into the bookshelves and unlocked it, revealing rows of file folders organized alphabetically. "William's private files," she explained. "Cases he found particularly significant, personal investments, family matters." Ethan joined her at the cabinet, scanning the labels. Most were straightforward: Harrington Family Trust, Lake Property, acquisitions, tax records, but one caught his eye: ES correspondence. "What's this one?" he asked, pointing to it. Eleanor stilled, her expression carefully neutral. "Those would be letters from my early years, before I became Eleanor Harrington." "ES? Eleanor Sullivan. My maiden name." Ethan's curiosity intensified. Why would Kensington point him toward Eleanor's past? "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the folder. A moment's hesitation before she nodded. "Of course. That is why we're here." Ethan withdrew the folder and carried it to the desk, opening it carefully. Inside were letters bundled with faded ribbon, newspaper clippings yellowed with age, and several official-looking documents. The first letter was dated June 1967, written in a flowing feminine script on pale blue stationery. "My dearest William, I cannot express the depth of my gratitude for your intervention in this matter. Father remains unaware of the true circumstances, believing only that you are representing me in a minor legal dispute related to my teaching position. Your discretion has preserved what remains of my reputation and spared my family considerable pain. The arrangements you've made in Denver seem most appropriate. 3 months should provide sufficient time, as the doctor confirmed yesterday that things are progressing as expected. I've told everyone I've accepted a summer position at the conservatory there, which explains my absence neatly. Your kindness to me during this difficult time has been my only comfort. I know that professional ethics prevent anything beyond friendship between us now, but perhaps when this chapter closes, we might explore the connection that I believe we both feel. With deepest appreciation, Eleanor Ethan looked up from the letter, finding Eleanor by the window, her back to him as she gazed out. At the darkness, you were pregnant, he said quietly, the letter's meaning becoming clear. In 1967, she turned to face him, her expression composed but her eyes holding a shadow of old pain. Yes, I was 22, teaching music at the Pinecrest Academy for girls, unmarried of course. And William helped you. He did. He was 45, then already an established attorney, though not yet a judge. He arranged for me to stay with a discreet family in Denver during the later months and handled the adoption afterward. She moved to a chair near the desk, sitting with the careful posture Ethan had come to recognize as her way of managing discomfort. It was a different time, Sheriff. An unwed mother would lose her teaching position, her standing in the community. Everything. Ethan continued reading through the documents, finding legal papers related to a closed adoption. No father was listed on the birth certificate, just a blank space where a name should have been, the baby's father. A visiting music professor from Boston, Marcus Reed. He returned east when I told him about the pregnancy, made it clear he had a fiancée there and wanted no part of the situation. Her voice was matter-of-fact, stripped of emotion by the passage of decades. I was naive, sheltered despite my education. William was the only person I could think to turn to, and later you married him. 7 years later, yes, after his first wife died. By then I was teaching at the college in Meridian City. We maintained a friendship throughout those years. He never judged me for what had happened. Ethan absorbed this information, turning it over in his mind. A youthful indiscretion, an unexpected pregnancy, a discreet adoption, all standard fare for small-town secrets. But significant enough for Kensington to point him toward it. This is what Kensington wanted me to find? Evidence that you had a child out of wedlock 50 years ago? Not precisely. Eleanor rose and moved to the cabinet again, selecting another folder labeled Harrington Foundation. Richard's interest lies here. She handed him the folder, which contained legal documents establishing the Harrington Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to environmental conservation and historical preservation. According to the founding documents, upon Eleanor's death, Willow Creek Manor and its surrounding property would transfer to the foundation, which would maintain it as a nature preserve and historical site open to limited public access. William established this foundation 2 years before his death, Eleanor explained. The amendment to his will that Richard contests is the one directing all of Willow Creek property to transfer to me and then to the foundation, bypassing the provisions of his earlier will that would have allowed for portions to be sold. Ethan skimmed the documents, noting the board of directors listed for the foundation: Eleanor Harrington, Dr. James Peterson, Mayor Thomas Wilson, and one name that made him pause: Catherine Reed Montgomery. "Who is Catherine Reed Montgomery?" he asked, pointing to the name. Eleanor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Catherine is a conservationist from Meridian City. She has extensive experience managing historical properties and environmental trusts. "Reed," Ethan repeated. "Any relation to Marcus Reed, the father of your child?" A long pause before Eleanor answered. "Catherine is my daughter, Sheriff. The child I gave up for adoption in 1967. Ethan stared at her, pieces clicking into place. "You found her?" "She found me 15 years ago. She had accessed her adoption records after her adoptive parents died." Eleanor's voice remained steady, but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was married by then, with children of her own. we established a cautious relationship. When William began planning the foundation, he suggested including her among the directors, given her professional expertise. Does Kensington know she's your daughter? He suspects. Catherine's resemblance to me is notable, and the timing of her appearance in our lives raised questions, though William never confirmed his suspicions. Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. So Kensington believes you amended Judge Harrington's will to benefit your biological daughter through the foundation, which would certainly provide him leverage in challenging the will's validity, Eleanor acknowledged. William was always clear about his intentions regarding Willow Creek. He wanted it preserved intact, but Richard could argue that his judgment was compromised by my influence, that the foundation was a means of channeling Harrington family assets to my biological child at the expense of other beneficiaries named in earlier versions of the will, including Kensington's law firm. Precisely. Ethan studied her carefully. Why didn't you tell me about this when explaining the situation with Kensington? Would it have changed your decision to accept my proposal? She countered. No, he admitted, after a moment, but it might have prepared me better for what we're facing. Eleanor nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. A fair point. I've grown accustomed to guarding this aspect of my history carefully. Even now, only a handful of people know that Catherine is my daughter. We've maintained the fiction of a professional relationship in public to avoid exactly this kind of complication. And Judge Harrington, he supported this decision to include her in the foundation. It was his suggestion. A softness entered her voice. William had no children of his own. He saw the foundation as a legacy that would honor his family's history while looking toward the future. Including Catherine felt right to him, a way of acknowledging her place in our lives without the public revelation that might have caused gossip. Ethan continued looking through the foundation documents, noting the careful legal structure that William Harrington had created. Whatever else might be said, it was clear that the judge had been meticulous in his planning. The foundation's bylaws included strict provisions for maintaining the ecological integrity of the property and preserving the historical character of the manor. This wasn't a hasty decision, Ethan observed. These documents show years of planning, consultations with conservation experts, and detailed provisions for the property's future. No, it wasn't hasty at all. William began considering the foundation after his first heart attack 5 years before he died. The idea evolved over time, but the core principle remained constant. Willow Creek should remain intact, its natural and historical value preserved rather than sacrificed for development. Ethan closed the folder, the picture becoming clearer. Kensington hoped I would discover Catherine's connection to you and assume the worst, that you had manipulated Judge Harrington to divert his estate to your biological daughter, while conveniently overlooking the fact that Catherine receives no personal financial benefit from the foundation, Eleanor added. Any compensation she earns as director is nominal, governed by strict non-profit regulations. Her involvement is professional, based on her expertise. Have you told her about our marriage? Yes, though not the details of our arrangement. She'll be at the hospital gala on Saturday. You'll meet her then. Eleanor rose, moving back to the window. I should have shared this with you from the beginning. I apologize for the omission. The genuine regret in her voice surprised Ethan. In the short time he'd known her, Eleanor had presented herself as a woman who made no apologies for her decisions. This glimpse of vulnerability felt significant. We all have parts of our past we prefer to keep private, he said, thinking of his own history, the years after his parents' death, the desperate measures he'd sometimes taken to provide for Rebecca while maintaining the appearance of stability so she could focus on her education. Eleanor turned from the window, studying him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beneath the surface. Indeed, though in a partnership such as ours, transparency serves us better than secrecy. Agreed. Ethan gestured to the files still on the desk. Is there anything else here I should know about? Other surprises Kensington might try to use against us? She considered the question seriously. William kept journals. He began the practice as a young attorney and maintained it throughout his life. She moved to the bookshelves, indicating a row of leather-bound volumes arranged by year. The more recent ones might contain his thoughts on the Foundation, perhaps references to his cognitive state that could counter Kensington's claims about diminished capacity. Ethan nodded. I'd like to review them, if you don't mind. Of course, though perhaps not tonight. It's growing late, and I find this excursion into the past has tired me more than I anticipated. Indeed, the lines around her eyes had deepened, and she moved with the careful deliberation that he'd come to recognize as a sign of fatigue. Tomorrow, then, he agreed, rising from the chair. Thank you for sharing this with me, Eleanor. I know it wasn't easy. As they left the study, Eleanor locking the door behind them, Ethan found himself reflecting on how quickly his perception of this woman had evolved. The calculating businesswoman who had proposed their arrangement remained, but alongside her now existed a young teacher who had faced impossible choices, a daughter given up, a patient partnership that had blossomed into marriage, and a widow determined to honor her husband's vision. They walked in comfortable silence through the quiet house, the soft glow of wall sconces lighting their way. At the junction where their paths would diverge, Eleanor to the master suite. In the central wing, Ethan to his quarters in the east wing. She paused. Sheriff, she said, her formal address at odds with the personal nature of what they'd just shared. I want you to know that whatever complications my past brings to our situation, my intentions regarding our arrangement remain steadfast. You will receive everything promised, regardless of how this conflict with Richard resolves. I never doubted that, Ethan replied truthfully. And Eleanor, I'm beginning to understand why Judge Harrington valued your partnership so highly. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps, or a deeper emotion. Thank you, she said. Simply, good night, Sheriff Caldwell. Good night, Mrs. Harrington. As Ethan made his way to his suite, he found himself thinking that while their marriage might remain a business arrangement in name, something subtle had shifted between them this evening. In sharing her history, Eleanor had extended a kind of trust he hadn't expected. That trust created an obligation beyond their legal contract, one he found he was increasingly willing to honor. In his room, Ethan crossed to the window that overlooked the eastern grounds of Willow Creek. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the manicured lawns and the dense grove of trees that bordered the property. In the distance, the waters of Lake Augusta glimmered like polished pewter. This place represented something significant, he realized, not just wealth or status, but a vision of preservation in a world increasingly defined by development and change. Judge William Harrington had understood that, and so did Eleanor. The question that remained was whether Ethan himself, brought here by financial desperation rather than conviction, could become a genuine guardian of that legacy. As he prepared for bed, Ethan's thoughts turned to the hospital gala just days away. There he would meet Catherine Reed Montgomery, the biological daughter whose existence connected all the threads of this increasingly complex situation. He would also face Richard Kensington in a public setting, knowing what the lawyer hoped to accomplish. Know your adversary, his father had always said. Thanks to Eleanor's revelations tonight, Ethan had gained valuable insight into Kensington's strategy. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to discover. In Judge Harrington's journals, in the history of Willow Creek Manor, and perhaps in Eleanor herself. 4 days into this strange marriage, he had only begun to uncover the truths that lay beneath the surface of his new reality. The morning of the hospital gala, Ethan rose early and drove to his cabin. He hadn't visited since the wedding, and some part of him needed to reconnect with the place that had defined his life. Before Willow Creek entered the picture, the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke greeted him as he stepped onto the porch. Inside, everything remained exactly as he'd left it. His mother's quilt folded at the foot of the bed, his father's books lining the shelf by the fireplace, the coffee pot still on the stove. He moved through the rooms slowly, touching objects that carried the weight of memory. The carved wooden box where his father had kept important papers, the old radio that had delivered news during winter storms, the rifle that had provided venison when money was tight. This place represented generations of Caldwell determination, the stubborn refusal to surrender to hardship that had characterized his family for as long as he could remember. Yet, as he stood in the center of the main room, Ethan realized something had shifted. The desperate fear of losing this place had receded. The cabin would remain in his possession. Eleanor had ensured that, but his life now expanded beyond these weathered walls. He was caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Spending an hour making sure everything was secure, Ethan drove to the sheriff's office to review schedules for the coming week. Deputy Rivera looked up in surprise when he entered. "Sheriff? Didn't expect to see you today." There was a question in his tone, a subtle probing about how Ethan's new circumstances might affect his commitment to the department. "Just checking in before tonight's event," Ethan replied, keeping his voice casual. "Everything quiet?" "Standard Saturday. Couple of speeding tickets, noise complaint at the tavern last night." Rivera hesitated, then added, "People are talking about you being at the gala tonight. First time a sheriff's been invited in, well, ever." Ethan nodded, unsurprised. The hospital gala had always been the domain of Pinecrest's elite, wealthy summer residents, business owners, the handful of professionals who formed the upper echelon of local society. The sheriff's department was usually represented by a single deputy managing traffic outside the country club, not by its chief seated among the guests. "Times change," he said simply, unwilling to elaborate on the circumstances that had elevated his social standing overnight. Rivera seemed to accept this, turning back to his report writing. "Mrs. Harrington's always been generous with the departments. A charity drive. Last year, she donated enough for those new bulletproof vests." This was news to Ethan. She never mentioned that. "Not the type to broadcast her good deeds, from what I hear." Rivera shrugged. "Unlike some of those summer folks who want their names on everything they touch." The observation stayed with Ethan as he drove back to Willow Creek to prepare for the evening. He'd spent the past 2 days reviewing Judge Harrington's journals from his final years, finding in them a sharp, lucid mind, documenting legal opinions, community affairs, and personal reflections. The entries directly contradicted Kensington's claims of cognitive decline, revealing instead a man deeply engaged with complex issues right until his final illness. Most striking were the judge's mentions of Eleanor, always with profound respect, often with genuine tenderness. Their marriage, arranged initially for practical considerations, according to Eleanor herself, had clearly evolved into something deeper over the decades. Ethan wondered if his own unusual union might follow a similar path, then dismissed the thought as impractical given Eleanor's prognosis. Harrison had laid out Ethan's new evening attire when he returned, a tailored tuxedo that fit perfectly, making him look like someone who belonged in the rarefied world he was about to enter. As he adjusted his bow tie, a light knock sounded. "At his door, come in," he called, expecting Harrison with some last-minute instruction on proper gala etiquette. Instead, Eleanor entered, already dressed for the evening in a gown of deep sapphire blue that brought out the remarkable color of her eyes. A simple diamond pendant gleamed at her throat, and her silver hair was arranged in an elegant style that softened her features. She moved with the practiced grace of a woman who had navigated such social occasions for decades. "You look very handsome, Sheriff," she said, her gaze approving as it swept over him. "Harrison has excellent taste." "And you look lovely," Ethan replied, meaning it. There was a dignified beauty to Eleanor that transcended age, a combination of impeccable posture, intelligent eyes, and the confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was. "Thank you." She moved to the window, gazing out at the grounds where twilight was falling. "I wanted a moment to prepare you for this evening. The hospital gala is Pinecrest's most significant social event. Everyone who matters will be there, watching us closely." I assumed as much. Richard will attempt to create awkwardness, to look for cracks in our presentation. She turned to face him fully. "Catherine will be there as well. We typically maintain our professional relationship in public, though most of the board members know she's my daughter. It's not a secret, so much as a private matter we don't discuss openly." Ethan nodded. "I understand. How should I address her?" "Mrs. Montgomery is appropriate for a first meeting. She's aware of our marriage, but not the specific terms. She believes, as do most people, that our relationship developed organically through my late husband's friendship with you." This fabrication struck Ethan as tenuous, given that he and Judge Harrington had rarely interacted directly. But he supposed most people would accept what they were told, rather than question the sudden union between Pinecrest's wealthiest widow and its sheriff. "And Kensington? What's our approach with him?" "Cordial but reserved. We acknowledge him as William's former partner, but give no opening for significant conversation." Eleanor smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her gown. "Above all, we present a united front, a dignified couple with nothing to hide and nothing to prove." As their car approached the Pinecrest Country Club an hour later, Ethan noted the line of luxury vehicles discharging passengers at the entrance, German sedans, Italian sports cars, massive SUVs that cost more than many Pinecrest residents earned in several years. Harrison expertly guided Eleanor's Bentley to the drop-off point, where a valet waited to assist them. Ethan stepped out first, extending his hand to help Eleanor from the car. As they walked toward the entrance, her arm lightly resting on his, he felt the weight of attention turning their way. Curious glances, whispered comments behind hands, the subtle shifting of social calculations as Pinecrest's elite reassessed. The sheriff, who had suddenly ascended to their ranks. The country club's main hall had been transformed for the occasion with dramatic floral arrangements, twinkling lights, and a string quartet playing in one corner. Circular tables draped in white linens surrounded a wooden dance floor, each setting gleaming with silver and crystal. A bar staffed by bartenders in formal attire occupied one wall, while silent auction items were displayed along another. Mayor Wilson intercepted them just inside the entrance, his wife Linda at his side. "Eleanor, Sheriff," he greeted them with practiced bonhomie. "Don't you both look splendid this evening?" "Thomas, Linda," Eleanor nodded graciously. "The decorations are lovely. The committee has outdone itself." "Indeed they have," Linda Wilson agreed, her gaze darting between Eleanor and Ethan with poorly concealed curiosity. "Sheriff, we're so pleased you could join us this year. Your new position in the community certainly opens doors, doesn't it?" The barbed comment hung in the air momentarily before Eleanor smoothly intervened. "The sheriff has always been an essential part of Pinecrest. It's the community's perspective that has expanded to recognize that fact." Her tone was pleasant but carried unmistakable rebuke. Linda Wilson flushed slightly, adjusting her diamond bracelet. "Of course, I only meant Eleanor." A woman's voice interrupted the awkward exchange. "I was hoping to catch you before the seating began." Ethan turned to see a striking woman in her early 50s approaching. Tall and slender, with auburn hair styled in a sophisticated bob, she carried herself with the same straight-backed poise as Eleanor. But it was her eyes that immediately caught Ethan's attention, the same remarkable shade of hazel as his wife's, set in a face whose bone structure echoed Eleanor's in ways too specific to be coincidental. "Catherine," Eleanor greeted her with the polite warmth appropriate for professional associates, though Ethan detected an undercurrent of deeper emotion. "How lovely to see you. May I introduce my husband, Sheriff Ethan Caldwell. Ethan, this is Catherine Montgomery, Executive Director of the Meridian City Historical Trust and a board member of the Harrington Foundation." "Mrs. Montgomery," Ethan said, extending his hand. "Eleanor has spoken highly of your work with historical preservation." "Sheriff," Catherine replied, her handshake firm and direct. Her gaze assessed him with the same penetrating quality he'd experienced from Eleanor. "Your marriage came as something of a surprise. I understand congratulations are in order." "Thank you. Will the Foundation Board meeting next week proceed as scheduled?" she asked, turning to Eleanor. "There are several matters requiring attention, particularly regarding the easement applications. Of course, the recent changes in my personal circumstances don't affect Foundation business." Eleanor's tone was perfectly balanced between professional courtesy and personal warmth. Catherine nodded, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts regarding her mother's sudden marriage. "Excellent. I should greet the other board members. We'll catch up properly during dinner, I'm sure." As she moved away, Ethan noted the physical similarities between mother and daughter became even more apparent. The same elegant carriage, the subtle gestures, the way both women commanded attention without seeking it. "She's remarkable," he commented quietly to Eleanor as they made their way toward their assigned table. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, a hint of pride briefly breaking through her composed exterior. "She's built an impressive career entirely on her own merits. 2 children in college now, both brilliant. Her husband David is chief of surgery at Meridian City Hospital." Their table was positioned prominently near the center of the room, a not-so-subtle acknowledgement of Eleanor's status as the galaxy's most significant patron. Dr. Peterson and his wife were already seated, along with the banker Henry Williams and his spouse, and the Crawfords, who owned the largest real estate development firm in the county. Ethan held Eleanor's chair, noting how easily she slipped into conversation with these people who had been her social peers for decades. He was preparing himself for an evening of navigating unfamiliar social dynamics when a voice spoke from behind him. "Sheriff Caldwell, settling into your new role, I see." Richard Kensington stood there, immaculate in his tuxedo, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. His wife, a thin woman with carefully preserved blonde beauty, watched the exchange with sharp eyes. "Mr. Kensington," Ethan acknowledged, keeping his tone neutral. "Mrs. Kensington, enjoying the evening?" "Immensely. These affairs are always so revealing." Kensington's gaze shifted to Eleanor, who was engaged in conversation with Mrs. Peterson. "Eleanor looks well. Marriage seems to agree with her." "We're both finding the arrangement satisfactory," Ethan replied, deliberately echoing the transactional language Kensington himself had used during their office meeting. A slight smile played at the corner of Kensington's mouth. "Indeed. I trust you've had time to explore Willow Creek thoroughly. Such a historic property holds so many fascinating details." "I'm learning something new every day. I'm sure you are." Kensington's gaze drifted to where Catherine Montgomery stood chatting with hospital board members. "Have you met all the key players in Eleanor's circle yet? Some connections are particularly illuminating." Before Ethan could respond, Eleanor turned, noticing Kensington for the first time. Her expression remained pleasant, though Ethan detected the subtle stiffening of her posture. "Richard, Diane," she greeted them with cool politeness. "The committee has outdone itself this year, hasn't it?" "As usual when you're the primary benefactor," Kensington replied. "Your generosity to the hospital has always been commendable, Eleanor. Though I must say, I was surprised to hear about your substantial donation to the children's wing. William always thought hospital expansions should be funded through bonds rather than private philanthropy. The comment was clearly aimed at suggesting Eleanor was acting against her late husband's wishes, establishing a pattern that Kensington could leverage in court. William's views evolved considerably in his final years, Eleanor replied smoothly, as you would know if you'd maintained the close contact you claim. The children's wing was his suggestion, in fact. He saw it as a fitting legacy for Pinecrest's future generations. How convenient that your recollection differs from mine, Kensington remarked, his smile never wavering. Ethan stepped closer to Eleanor, placing his hand lightly at the small of her back, in a gesture of support that felt surprisingly natural. Judge Harrington's journals document his thoughts on the children's wing quite extensively, he said. I've been reviewing his final years of entries this week. His writing shows remarkable clarity and foresight, particularly regarding community needs. The brief flash of surprise in Kensington's eyes confirmed Ethan's suspicion that the lawyer hadn't expected them to have reviewed the journals yet. Ah, yes, William's journals. Fascinating reading, though subjective by nature. The medical records present a more objective picture, I'm afraid. Kensington raised his glass in a mock toast. But this isn't the venue for such discussions. Enjoy your evening. I'm sure we'll have ample opportunity to compare notes in court next month. As Kensington and his wife moved away, Eleanor turned slightly toward Ethan. Well handled, she murmured. Though I hadn't planned to reveal our awareness of the journal so soon, sometimes showing your opponent you've anticipated their move changes their strategy, Ethan replied. My father taught me that in chess. A genuine smile touched Eleanor's lips. Your father sounds like a wise man. William would have appreciated that approach. The remainder of the dinner proceeded more smoothly. Ethan found himself gradually relaxing into the rhythm of the event, observing the social dynamics at play around him. He noticed how Eleanor commanded respect without demanding it, how conversations shifted subtly when she offered an opinion, the deference shown to her judgment on community matters. He also observed Catherine throughout the evening. She was seated at a table with other Foundation board members, but her gaze occasionally drifted toward Eleanor with an expression that mixed professional respect with something more personal. Twice, Ethan caught her studying him thoughtfully when she thought he wasn't looking. After dinner, as coffee was being served, Catherine approached their table. Eleanor, might I borrow your husband for a moment? The hospital administrator was hoping to discuss the sheriff department's outreach program for at-risk youth. Eleanor nodded her assent, and Ethan followed Catherine toward a quieter corner of the room. It became immediately apparent that the hospital administrator was nowhere in sight. Sheriff Caldwell, Catherine said once they were out of earshot. I think it's time we had a direct conversation, don't you? About your sudden marriage to my mother. Her direct approach was reminiscent of Eleanor's no-nonsense style. I understand the official story, a friendship that blossomed into something more. But I know my mother well enough to recognize when there's more beneath the surface. Ethan considered his response carefully. Mrs. Montgomery, whatever arrangement exists between Eleanor and myself is private. So there is an arrangement. Catherine's gaze sharpened. I suspected as much. Is it financial? Has she offered you Willow Creek in exchange for protection during Richard's legal challenge? You seem concerned. Do you object to my presence in Eleanor's life? That depends entirely on your motives. Sheriff. She studied him with those penetrating eyes like her mother's. My concern is for Eleanor's well-being. She's a remarkable woman who has faced more challenges than most people realize. If your presence in her life provides genuine support and companionship, I welcome it. If you're simply waiting for her heart condition to advance your financial position, Well, that would be another matter entirely. Her directness demanded equal candor. My relationship with your mother began as a mutually beneficial arrangement, Ethan acknowledged quietly, but I've come to respect her greatly in the short time we've been married. My commitment to protecting her interests is genuine. Catherine considered this, seeming to weigh his sincerity. Fair enough. And you're aware of my connection to her? Yes. She's told me everything. Not everything, I suspect, Catherine replied, with a slight smile. My mother has always kept certain parts of herself carefully guarded. It's how she survived in a world that wasn't kind to women who stepped outside, accepted boundaries. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, Catherine glanced over his shoulder. We have company. Richard is approaching at 4 o'clock. Ethan turned, slightly confirming Kensington was indeed making his way toward them, his expression suggesting he found their private conversation intriguing. We'll continue this discussion another time, Sheriff, Catherine said, smoothly transitioning to a more public persona. Please consider my invitation to speak at the Youth Leadership Conference next month. The Foundation would be honored to have your participation. As Kensington reached them, Catherine acknowledged him with cool professionalism. Richard, I was just discussing the Foundation's youth programs with Sheriff Caldwell. How appropriate, Kensington replied, his tone suggesting he didn't believe this explanation for a moment. The Foundation's future must be of particular interest to the Sheriff, given his new connection to its chairwoman. The Foundation's work stands on its own merits, Catherine replied evenly, as Judge Harrington intended. Ah, yes, William's intentions. The central question before us, isn't it? Kensington's smile didn't reach his eyes. I look forward to exploring those intentions thoroughly in court, Mrs. Montgomery. Your testimony regarding when you first became acquainted with Eleanor will be particularly illuminating, I'm sure. The subtle threat hung in the air between them. Catherine met it with the same composure Ethan had observed in Eleanor. My professional qualifications for serving on the Foundation board are well documented, Richard, as is the timeline of my involvement, but you know that already. She turned to Ethan. Sheriff, we should rejoin the others. I believe the auction results are about to be announced. As they walked away, leaving Kensington watching their retreat, Ethan realized the evening had revealed layers of complexity he hadn't anticipated. The connections between Eleanor, Catherine, and the Foundation were more intricate than Eleanor had explained, and Kensington clearly believed he could exploit those connections to advance his case. Returning to Eleanor's side, Ethan found himself increasingly drawn into the role he'd initially accepted merely as a financial transaction. The subtle nod of appreciation Eleanor gave him as he took his seat beside her felt like more than social courtesy. It felt like genuine partnership in the face of a challenge that was proving more complex with each passing day. The morning after the gala, Ethan woke early, his mind still processing the previous evening's revelations. Eleanor had been quiet during the drive home, fatigue evident in the tight lines around her mouth, though she had maintained her composed demeanor until they were safely behind Willow Creek's doors. He dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, planning to spend the Sunday morning exploring the property more thoroughly. The expansive grounds contained hiking trails he'd yet to discover, and the physical activity would help clear his head. As he made his way downstairs, he passed Harrison in the hallway. "Good morning, Sheriff," the butler greeted him. "Mrs. Harrington asked me to inform you that she's resting this morning. Dr. Peterson recommended a day of quiet recovery after last night's exertions." "Is she unwell?" Ethan asked, concerned by the mention of the doctor. "Nothing beyond the usual fatigue, sir. These social events tax her strength more than she admits." Harrison's typically impassive expression softened slightly. She was pleased with how the evening went, said you conducted yourself admirably. The unexpected praise from Eleanor, delivered through her most trusted employee, caught Ethan off guard. Thank you for letting me know. I'll check on her later. After a quick breakfast, Ethan set out on foot, following a well-maintained path that wound through gardens before entering a wooded area at the property's eastern boundary. The late October air carried a crisp chill, the scent of fallen leaves, and pine sharp in his nostrils. He walked briskly, enjoying the solitude and natural beauty that Eleanor and Judge Harrington had so carefully preserved. The path eventually led to a clearing where a small stone building stood, a groundskeeper's cottage, judging by the tools visible through its windows. As Ethan approached, the door opened and an elderly man emerged, leaning on a walking stick. "Morning, Sheriff," the man called, his voice weathered but strong. "Figured you'd be finding your way out here eventually." Ethan approached, noting the man's gnarled hands and deeply lined face that spoke of decades spent working outdoors. "Good morning. I'm afraid you have the advantage of me." "Walter Nichols," the old man introduced himself. "Been tending these grounds since Judge Harrington's father was alive. Nearly 50 years now." "That's a remarkable tenure," Ethan replied, genuinely impressed. "I didn't realize anyone had been with Willow Creek that long. Longer than anyone except the family itself," Walter confirmed, gesturing toward a wooden bench beside the cottage. "Care to spell? I've got coffee on if you're interested." Ethan accepted, curious about this man who had witnessed so much of Willow Creek's history. Walter disappeared briefly into the cottage, returning with 2 mugs of steaming coffee. The bench offered a view across a small pond to the main house in the distance, its Victorian turrets and gables rising majestically against the morning sky. "Beautiful spot," Ethan observed, accepting the offered mug. "Judge always said this was the heart of Willow Creek," Walter replied, lowering himself carefully onto the bench. "Used to come out here most mornings before heading to court. Said it gave him perspective. You knew him well as anyone outside the family, I suppose. Watched him grow from a serious young lawyer to the man who shaped this country's justice system." Walter sipped his coffee, his rheumy eyes gazing across the pond. "Watched Miss Eleanor change too over the years." Change. From that frightened young music teacher who came to him for help to the Lady of Willow Creek. Walter spoke matter-of-factly, as if these were details Ethan would naturally know. "Course, that was all before your time. Before most folks around. You can remember." Ethan considered his response carefully. This man clearly knew Eleanor's history, including aspects she might consider private. "Eleanor has mentioned that Judge Harrington helped her during a difficult time in her youth," Walter nodded. "That he did. Changed both their lives, that situation." He turned his weathered face toward Ethan. "She told you about the baby?" "Catherine." "Yes." "Good. Secrets have a way of poisoning even the strongest foundations." Walter's gnarled fingers tightened around his mug. "But there's more to that story than most know. Even Miss Catherine herself, I suspect." Ethan's interest sharpened. "What do you mean?" Walter seemed to weigh his words carefully. "Not my place to speak of family matters, perhaps, but seeing as you're married to Miss Eleanor now, and with Richard Kensington stirring up the past." He sighed deeply. The judge wasn't just Eleanor's lawyer when she found herself in trouble. He was the reason for that trouble. Ethan stared at him, processing the implication. "Are you saying Judge Harrington was Catherine's father?" No, nothing like that." Walter shook his head firmly. "The music professor, Marcus Reed, he was the father, right enough. But the judge's first wife, Margaret, she was Marcus's cousin. Brought him to Pinecrest, introduced him to the academy where Eleanor taught." "I'm not following how this involves." "Judge Harrington." Walter's expression turned somber. "Margaret Harrington was a troubled woman, brilliant, beautiful, but haunted by demons that no doctor could exorcise. She'd suffered multiple miscarriages, and each one drove her deeper into melancholy. When she learned her young cousin had gotten Eleanor Sullivan pregnant, then abandoned her to face the consequences alone, something broke in Margaret. He paused, gazing out over the pond. Judge found Margaret in this very spot. She'd taken all her medication at once, left a note blaming herself for introducing Marcus to Eleanor for not seeing what kind of man he truly was. Judge was devastated, blamed himself for not recognizing how deep her despair had grown. "That's tragic," Ethan said quietly, "but I still don't see how it connects to the current situation with Kensington. Because helping Eleanor wasn't just charity or professional duty for William Harrington," Walter explained. "It was atonement. He believed if he'd paid more attention to Margaret instead of his career, she might have been saved. Helping Eleanor became his way of making amends." Walter shifted on the bench, wincing slightly at some hidden pain. The judge used his connections to arrange the adoption, kept Eleanor's name out of any public records, and made sure she could rebuild her life afterward. When they eventually married years later, many in town whispered it was inappropriate, the distinguished judge taking up with a woman half his age so soon after his first wife's death. "It wasn't soon," Ethan pointed out. "Eleanor said they married 7 years after Margaret died." 7 years of friendship and correspondence while Eleanor built a new life in Meridian City, Walter agreed. But few knew about that part. People saw what they wanted to see: a wealthy older man, a younger woman with no family connections. The rumors were ugly. Ethan was beginning to understand the weight of history that had shaped Eleanor. And Kensington? What was his role in all this? Walter's expression hardened. Richard was the judge's partner even then. He never approved of William's involvement with Eleanor, thought it would damage the firm's reputation. When William and Eleanor married, Richard argued against it vehemently, said it would raise questions about Margaret's death, bringing old scandals to light. But Judge Harrington married her anyway. He did. Said some things matter more than appearances or professional convenience. That was the beginning of the rift between them, still partners in name, but the close friendship was gone. Walter drained the last of his coffee. When the judge established the foundation and included Catherine on the board, Richard saw it as the final insult, bringing Eleanor's indiscretion into the Harrington legacy. The pieces were falling into place for Ethan. So Kensington's challenge to the will isn't just about money or property. It's personal, decades of resentment coming to a head. Precisely. Walter nodded approvingly. Richard believes he's the rightful guardian of the Harrington legacy, not Eleanor, certainly not Catherine, regardless of her professional qualifications, and he's using Judge Harrington's declining health as a pretext. A convenient one. The judge did have moments of forgetfulness in his final months. What man of 83 doesn't? But his mind remained sharp on matters of importance. Walter fixed Ethan with a penetrating gaze. "There's one more thing you should know, Sheriff. Something even Eleanor might not fully understand." "What's that?" William knew his time was growing short. He also knew Richard would challenge Eleanor's right to Willow Creek after he was gone. That's why he created the foundation, not just to preserve the property, but to protect Eleanor from Richard's vindictiveness. By placing the property in a trust that benefits the community, he made it harder for Richard to claim it was being misused. Walter leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. The judge kept records, documentation of all Richard's questionable legal maneuvers over the years, clients overcharged, corners cut. Insurance, he called it. Said he hoped never to use it. But Eleanor should know where to find it if Richard ever threatened what mattered most. This was information of an entirely different magnitude. Where would these records be? Can't say for certain. Walter struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his walking stick. But the judge had a safe behind the painting in his study, the one of Willow Creek as it looked in his grandfather's day. Few knew about it. I only do because I helped him install it decades ago." As Ethan walked back toward the main house, his mind raced with this new information. If Judge Harrington had indeed compiled evidence of Kensington's professional misconduct, it could decisively end the challenge to Eleanor's inheritance. But using such information would likely destroy Kensington's career and reputation, a severe consequence that would need careful consideration. The morning had grown warmer, sunlight filtering through the trees in dappled patterns across the path. Ethan found himself reflecting on the interconnected lives that had shaped Willow Creek's history: Margaret's tragedy, Eleanor's youthful crisis, William's attempt at redemption, Catherine's unknowing role in a drama that began before her birth. And now he himself had become part of this complex legacy, initially through financial desperation, but increasingly through genuine concern for Eleanor and the future she sought to secure. Back at the house, Ethan quietly made his way to the West Wing study. The room felt different now that he understood more of its history. Not just a judge's workspace, but a sanctuary where William Harrington had grappled with personal loss, professional challenges, and the unexpected second chance at happiness that Eleanor had represented. The painting Walter had mentioned hung prominently on the wall behind the desk, a lovingly rendered image of Willow Creek in an earlier era. The grounds less manicured, the surrounding forest more dominant. Ethan carefully lifted it from its hooks, revealing a wall safe with a combination dial. He stepped back, considering his options. The combination would be something significant to Judge Harrington, a date perhaps, or a numerical pattern with personal meaning. Trying random combinations would be futile. This would require Eleanor's input, which meant sharing what Walter had told him. Replacing the painting, Ethan left the study and made his way to Eleanor's suite. He knocked softly, prepared to withdraw if she was still resting. But her clear voice invited him to enter. He found her seated in an armchair near the window, wrapped in a cashmere throw, despite the room's comfortable temperature. A book lay open in her lap, but her gaze was directed outside, where autumn colors painted the distant tree line in russets and golds. She looked smaller somehow, the social armor of the previous night replaced by simple slacks and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Sheriff," she greeted him, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Harrison mentioned you were exploring the grounds this morning." "I was," Ethan confirmed, taking the chair opposite hers. "I met Walter Nichols." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes, recognition perhaps, or wariness. "Walter has been with Willow Creek longer than I have. His knowledge of the grounds is unparalleled. He shared some history with me, about Judge Harrington's first wife, Margaret, about the circumstances that brought you and the judge together initially." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her book absently. "Walter was here when Margaret died. He was the one who found William by the pond afterward, inconsolable with grief and guilt." Her voice was soft, but steady. Some memories never fade for those who witness such moments. He mentioned a safe in the study, behind the landscape painting. This captured her full attention. "Did he tell you what it contains?" "Documentation regarding Richard Kensington. Evidence of professional misconduct that Judge Harrington compiled as insurance against exactly the kind of challenge Richard is mounting." "Now," Eleanor closed her book carefully, setting it aside. "William mentioned such documentation once, years ago. I assumed he had destroyed it when he and Richard reconciled sufficiently to continue their practice together. According to Walter, he kept it as protection for you, for Willow Creek's future." She absorbed this information, her expression thoughtful. That would be like William. Thorough, forward-thinking, determined to protect what he valued even from beyond the grave. She met Ethan's gaze directly. "But using such information against Richard would have consequences beyond our current legal battle. It could destroy him professionally, personally." I had the same thought, Ethan admitted. But knowing it exists gives us leverage. We might not need to use it, just let Kensington know we have it. Perhaps. Eleanor rose with careful movements, crossing to a small secretary desk in the corner of the room. From a drawer, she withdrew a small notebook bound in worn leather. William's personal notebook. He recorded combinations, account numbers, things he didn't trust even in his journals. She leafed through the pages until she found what she was seeking. The safe combination would be here, April 18th, 1975. She handed the notebook to Ethan. Our wedding date. Should we open it now? Ethan asked. Eleanor considered this. No. Let's wait until tomorrow, when Catherine arrives for the foundation meeting. This concerns her too, though she doesn't yet realize how deeply her existence has shaped Willow Creek's history. You've never told her about Margaret? About her connection to your past? Some truths serve no purpose except to burden those who receive them, Eleanor replied. Catherine knows I was young and unprepared when I found myself pregnant. She knows her biological father abandoned us both. She knows William Harrington showed me kindness when few others would. The rest, Margaret's despair, William's guilt, the complex web that drew us all together, what would that knowledge give her except pain? Ethan understood her reasoning, though he wondered if Catherine might prefer difficult truth to comforting. Omission. Before he could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Harrison entered, his typically impassive features showing unusual concern. Excuse me, Mrs. Harrington, Sheriff. There's a situation requiring attention. Mr. Kensington has arrived with Sheriff Donovan from Meridian County. They're asking to speak with you both immediately. Ethan frowned. Sheriff Donovan, what's his business here? He didn't specify, sir, but he mentioned having a warrant. Eleanor's expression remained composed, though Ethan noticed her hands tighten slightly on the arms of her chair. Show them to the main parlor, Harrison. We'll join them momentarily. After the butler withdrew, Eleanor turned to Ethan. This is unexpected. Meridian County has no jurisdiction here. No. But if Kensington has convinced them there's criminal activity that crosses county lines, they might have grounds for involvement. Ethan's mind raced through possibilities. I should call my office, have Deputy Rivera join us. A wise precaution. Eleanor moved to her closet, selecting a light jacket to wear over her sweater. The simple action seemed to transform her, each movement rebuilding the careful dignity that defined her public persona. Whatever Richard has planned, we'll face it together. As they made their way downstairs, Ethan was struck by Eleanor's composure. Despite the surprise development, despite her physical frailty, she carried herself with the same quiet determination he'd observed at the gala. It wasn't just social training, he realized. It was character, forged through decades of navigating challenges that would have broken many people. In the main parlor, Richard Kensington stood by the fireplace, immaculate, in a tailored weekend suit. Beside him, Sheriff Nathan Donovan, a stocky man in his 50s, whom Ethan knew professionally but not well, looked uncomfortable in the elegant surroundings. Eleanor, Kensington greeted her with false warmth. I apologize for the Sunday intrusion, but a matter has arisen that couldn't wait until business hours. Indeed, Eleanor's tone was coolly polite as she took a seat, gesturing for the others to do the same. Sheriff Donovan, this is unexpected. What brings Meridian County law enforcement to Pinecrest? Donovan cleared his throat. Mrs. Harrington, information has come to my attention regarding potentially fraudulent activity involving the Harrington Foundation, specifically concerning the appointment and compensation of board members. I see. Eleanor's gaze shifted briefly to Kensington, before returning to Donovan. And this information came from an anonymous source, Kensington interjected smoothly, though the documentation is quite specific. It suggests that Catherine Montgomery's position on the foundation board violates several regulations governing non-profit organizations, given her undisclosed personal relationship to you. Ethan stepped forward. Sheriff Donovan, I'm not clear on why this would be a matter for law enforcement rather than the probate court where the foundation's structure is already under review. The allegations include tax fraud, Sheriff Caldwell. Donovan replied, looking increasingly uncomfortable. If foundation funds were misappropriated to benefit Mrs. Harrington's biological daughter while concealing their relationship, that constitutes criminal activity. This is absurd, Eleanor said calmly. Catherine's relationship to me has never been concealed from the relevant authorities. Her appointment to the board was based entirely on her professional qualifications, which are exceptional, and her compensation is nominal, exactly the same as other board members. The documentation suggests otherwise, Kensington said. Sheriff Donovan has a warrant to examine the Foundation's financial records and board meeting minutes. Donovan produced an official-looking document. I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington, but I need to examine the records stored here at Willow Creek. The Foundation's official address is listed as this property. Eleanor accepted the warrant, scanning it with the practiced eye of someone familiar with legal documents. This appears to be in order, though I question its necessity. The Foundation's records are open to legitimate inquiry through proper channels. She turned to Ethan. Sheriff, would you please call Deputy Rivera as we discussed? Also, I believe we should contact our attorney immediately. The quiet dignity with which she handled the intrusion impressed Ethan. Even faced with this clear attempt by Kensington to intimidate her, she remained poised, neither panicking nor growing defensive. Of course, he agreed, taking out his phone. As he stepped aside to make the calls, he watched Eleanor rise to her feet. The Foundation records are kept in William's study, she informed Donovan. I'll show you where they're located. Richard, as this is an official law enforcement matter, I'm sure you understand that your presence during the examination of these documents would be inappropriate, given your ongoing legal action against the Foundation. Kensington's satisfied expression faltered slightly. I'm here as an officer of the court, Eleanor. My knowledge of the Foundation's structure could be valuable to Sheriff Donovan's investigation. You're here as an adversary in pending litigation. Eleanor corrected him firmly. Sheriff Donovan is perfectly capable of reviewing financial records without your assistance. Unless, of course, this visit is less about legitimate investigation and more about gaining access to information useful in our court case. Donovan shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Harrington is correct, Mr. Kensington. I'll need to examine these records independently to maintain the integrity of any potential case. As Ethan completed his calls, confirming that Deputy Rivera and Eleanor's attorney were both en route, he realized that the morning's discoveries had provided unexpected context for this confrontation. Kensington wasn't just a lawyer pursuing a legal claim. He was a man settling decades-old scores, willing to use any means to undermine Eleanor's position. The question now was whether Judge Harrington's foresight, the evidence secured in the study safe, would provide the leverage needed to end Kensington's vendetta once and for all. As Eleanor led Sheriff Donovan toward the West Wing, her head held high despite the implicit threat to everything she valued, Ethan found himself increasingly committed to ensuring that the judge's final act of protection for his wife would not be in vain. While Eleanor guided Sheriff Donovan to the study, Ethan remained in the parlor with Kensington, neither man bothering to disguise their mutual assessment. An interesting tactic, Ethan observed after a moment of loaded silence, using another county's sheriff to gain access to documents relevant to your civil case. Kensington's smile didn't reach his eyes. The potential violations are genuine. Sheriff Caldwell, the Foundation's structure has always been questionable from a legal standpoint. Strange that these concerns arise only after Judge Harrington's death, given that you were his partner when he established the Foundation. My loyalty to William occasionally required overlooking certain irregularities. That obligation ended with his passing. Kensington moved to examine a silver-framed photograph on the mantel, William and Eleanor at some formal event, perhaps. 20 years earlier. You've known Eleanor for what, 10 days now? I've observed her for 40 years. She's quite masterful at presenting the image she wants others to see. And yet Judge Harrington, who knew her better than anyone, trusted her completely. William had a blind spot where Eleanor was concerned. It began with guilt over Margaret's death and evolved into something more complicated. Kensington set the photograph down. Did she tell you about Margaret? About the role Eleanor played in that tragedy? Walter Nichols shared that history with me this morning, Ethan replied evenly. His version differs significantly from what you're implying. Kensington's eyebrows rose slightly. Ah, old Walter. Still loyal to the family mythology, I see. Did he also mention the safe behind the painting in William's study? The one containing documents William collected about certain professional disagreements between us over the years? The direct reference to the safe caught Ethan off guard. You know about that? Of course. William and I were partners for 40 years, Sheriff. There were few secrets between us, despite our occasional differences. Kensington's confidence seemed absolute. Eleanor probably believes those documents give her leverage. She's wrong. The statute of limitations has expired on anything William might have documented. Before Ethan could respond, the front door opened, and Deputy Rivera entered, followed closely by a tall woman in her 60s with short silver hair and sharp features. Sheriff, Rivera acknowledged Ethan with a nod. This is highly irregular, the silver-haired woman announced, fixing Kensington with a steely gaze. Patricia Winters, Mrs. Harrington's attorney, she introduced herself to Ethan. Where is my client? Showing Sheriff Donovan to the Foundation records, Ethan replied. He has a warrant based on allegations of financial impropriety involving Catherine Montgomery's position on the board. Patricia Winters' expression tightened. Richard's latest maneuver lacks even the pretense of professional ethics. Where are they now? The West Wing study, Ethan directed, watching as the attorney strode purposefully from the room. He turned to Rivera. Stay with Mr. Kensington. I'm going to check on Mrs. Harrington. The West Wing corridor was quiet as Ethan approached the study, but raised voices became audible as he neared the door. Completely baseless allegations, Patricia Winters was saying as Ethan entered. The Foundation's structure has been reviewed by multiple regulatory agencies without issue. Sheriff, Donovan stood awkwardly beside the desk, several folders open before him. Eleanor sat in a nearby chair, her posture straight, despite the evident strain in her expression. Patricia Winters stood protectively beside her client, indignation radiating from her professional demeanor. I'm simply following procedure based on credible information, Donovan replied, though he looked increasingly uncomfortable. These financial records appear to be in order, but the documentation I received suggested fabricated documentation. Patricia interrupted. Part of an ongoing attempt by Richard Kensington to undermine Mrs. Harrington's control of the Harrington estate through any means available, including misusing your authority, Sheriff. Donovan flushed. I take exception to that characterization, Ms. Winters. The warrant was properly obtained based on specific allegations. Nathan, Ethan said, using the sheriff's first name to establish their professional peer relationship, I think we both know what's happening here. Kensington is using your department to gain access to information for his civil case. The timing isn't coincidental. Donovan's discomfort visibly increased. Look, Ethan, I'm just doing my job. The documentation I received was almost certainly provided by Kensington himself, Ethan finished for him. Have you verified its authenticity with any independent sources? The hesitation in Donovan's response was answer enough. Eleanor rose from her chair with careful dignity. Sheriff Donovan, I have nothing to hide regarding the Foundation's operations. Every expenditure, every appointment has been meticulously documented and legally sound. Her voice was steady, despite the obvious toll the confrontation was taking. Catherine Montgomery's qualifications for her position are exceptional, and her compensation is identical to that of other board members. Her relationship to me has been properly disclosed in all regulatory filings. She moved to the painting, behind the desk, removing it from the wall to reveal the safe that Walter had described. However, since we're discussing potential improprieties, perhaps you should also examine these documents. Using the combination from William's notebook, Eleanor opened the safe and withdrew a thick manila envelope. My late husband anticipated that Richard might someday attempt to challenge his wishes regarding Willow Creek. He prepared accordingly. She handed the envelope to Ethan rather than Donovan, a clear indication of where her trust lay. Sheriff Caldwell, as my husband and as the ranking law enforcement officer in this jurisdiction, I believe these materials fall under your authority. Ethan accepted the envelope, feeling the weight of multiple documents inside. He opened it, carefully finding meticulously organized files labeled with dates spanning nearly 3 decades. Each contained detailed records of cases where Kensington had apparently engaged in questionable practices, overbilling clients, suppressing evidence, manipulating testimony. These appear to be records of professional misconduct, Ethan noted, keeping his tone neutral as he examined the top documents, some potentially crossing into criminal territory. Donovan stepped forward, his law enforcement instincts overriding his discomfort. "May I?" Ethan handed him several of the more serious files. Donovan's expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed them. "This complicates matters," he admitted finally. "Indeed," Patricia Winters agreed, her tone dry. "Perhaps you might reconsider the credibility of your anonymous source, Sheriff Donovan." Eleanor had retaken her seat, the brief exertion of opening the safe having drained her limited energy. Yet her voice remained clear as she addressed both sheriffs. "William never wanted to use these records against Richard. Despite their differences, they had been partners and friends for decades. He collected this information as insurance, hoping never to need it." Her gaze settled on Ethan. "The decision about how to proceed now rests with you, Sheriff Caldwell." The responsibility of this moment wasn't lost on Ethan. The documents provided leverage that could permanently end Kensington's challenge to Eleanor's inheritance, but using them meant destroying a man's professional reputation and potentially triggering criminal charges for past actions. "Let's start by addressing the immediate situation," Ethan decided. "Sheriff Donovan, given what you've seen here, do you intend to continue your investigation of the Harrington Foundation?" Donovan shook his head. "No, the financial records appear to be in order, and the new information raises significant questions about my source's credibility and motives." He closed the folder he'd been examining. "I'll withdraw the warrant and close this inquiry." "Thank you," Eleanor acknowledged. "And the documents regarding Mr. Kensington?" "Will remain secure while we determine the appropriate course of action," Ethan assured her. "Some of these allegations, while serious, may be beyond the statute of limitations, as Kensington himself suggested. Others might still be actionable." "Kensington knew about these files?" Patricia Winters asked sharply. "He mentioned the safe when I was speaking with him downstairs," Ethan confirmed. "Seemed confident that nothing William collected could harm him now." "Interesting," Patricia mused. "That confidence might be misplaced. The ethical violations alone would likely result in disbarment, regardless of criminal prosecution." As the group made their way back to the main parlor, Ethan found himself watching Eleanor. Despite the strain etched in the tightening around her mouth, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had impressed him from their first meeting. What had begun as a financial arrangement had evolved into genuine respect, and, he realized with some surprise, protectiveness. Kensington's expression shifted from smug confidence to wariness as the group entered the parlor. His gaze fixed on the envelope in Ethan's hands, recognition and the first flicker of unease crossing his features. "Sheriff Donovan has concluded his review of the Foundation's records," Eleanor announced calmly. "As expected, everything is in order." Donovan nodded, his discomfort with the entire situation evident. "The allegations appear to have been unfounded. I'll be withdrawing the warrant and closing this matter." "That seems premature," Kensington objected. "A thorough investigation would require credible evidence," Ethan interrupted, holding up the envelope. "Something apparently lacking in your allegations against the Foundation, but plentiful in Judge Harrington's documentation of your professional activities over the years." All color drained from Kensington's face. "Those records are decades old. Many involve cases where the statute of limitations has expired, perhaps for criminal prosecution." Patricia Winters agreed. "But the State Bar Association imposes no such limitations on ethical violations. They would certainly be interested in reviewing this material, particularly in light of your current actions against Judge Harrington's widow." The implied threat hung in the air. Deputy Rivera shifted uncomfortably by the door, while Donovan looked like a man who'd stepped into a family dispute far more complex than he'd anticipated. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Kensington suggested, his usual smoothness fracturing under pressure. "I think we've had enough private discussions," Eleanor replied. "Williams spent 40 years protecting your reputation, Richard, even while documenting your transgressions. He never wanted to use this information against you. I've honored that preference until now." She rose from her chair, approaching Kensington with measured steps. Though physically frail, her presence commanded the room. "Your challenge to Williams will end today," she stated, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "You will withdraw all objections to the Foundation's structure and my inheritance. In return, these documents remain private." Kensington's gaze darted between the envelope and Eleanor's resolute expression. "And if I refuse?" "Then Sheriff Caldwell will be obligated to review these materials with the appropriate authorities," Eleanor replied simply. "Your choice, Richard. Honor Williams' final wishes or destroy the professional reputation he spent decades helping you build." The silence that followed was electric with tension. Finally, Kensington's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. "You've won, Eleanor, as you always do." The animosity in his voice was unmistakable, yet beneath it lay something like reluctant respect. "I'll have the objections withdrawn tomorrow. In writing," Patricia Winters specified. "On my desk by noon." "Of course," Kensington agreed, his composure returning as he accepted the inevitable. "Sheriffs, if we're finished here, I believe I'll take my leave." After Sheriff Donovan and Kensington had departed, with Rivera following to ensure a smooth exit, Eleanor sank into the nearest chair, the careful facade of strength finally cracking to reveal the exhaustion beneath. "Patricia," she said quietly, "would you give me a moment with the sheriff, please?" The attorney nodded, squeezing Eleanor's shoulder gently before withdrawing. When the door closed behind her, Eleanor let out a long, slow breath, closing her eyes briefly. "That was well handled," she said finally, looking up at Ethan. "Your instincts about when to reveal the documents were precisely right." "You're the one who faced down Kensington," Ethan replied, taking the chair opposite hers. "That couldn't have been easy after all these years." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Confrontation has never been my preferred approach. William was the fighter in our partnership. I preferred to solve problems quietly, behind the scenes. Like arranging our marriage," Ethan observed. "Yes." Her gaze was direct, assessing him with the same penetrating intelligence that had impressed him from their first meeting. What began as a practical solution has become something more complex, hasn't it? It has, Ethan agreed, surprising himself. With his candor, when I accepted your proposal, it was purely financial, a way to save my cabin, secure my sister's future. I didn't expect to become invested in Willow Creek's fate. In mine? Eleanor finished for him when he hesitated. Both, he admitted. Learning about Judge Harrington, about your history with him, about Catherine, it's changed how I see this arrangement. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. William often said that understanding someone's story is the beginning of genuine connection. 5 days ago, you knew me only as a wealthy widow offering financial salvation. Now you know me as a woman who has faced her share of difficulties, who has built a life from the remnants of youthful mistakes and unexpected kindnesses, and who has shown remarkable strength in protecting what matters to her, Ethan added. As have you? She countered. You could have used William's documentation immediately, establishing your authority over Kensington from the beginning. Instead, you measured the consequences carefully, considering the human cost alongside the tactical advantage. She leaned forward slightly, wincing at some hidden discomfort but pressing on. That's why William admired you, you know. He mentioned you several times in his later journals. The young deputy who became sheriff, who enforced the law with judgment rather than rigid adherence to rules. He saw in you something of himself as a younger man. This revelation surprised Ethan. I had no idea he'd notice me beyond routine interactions. William noticed everything, Eleanor said, genuine fondness warming her voice. He believed in the importance of understanding the character of those who shape a community. He would be pleased by how you've handled this situation. Before Ethan could respond, a soft knock at the door preceded Harrison's entrance. Pardon the interruption, but Mrs. Montgomery has arrived early for tomorrow's foundation meeting. She's heard about the incident with Sheriff Donovan and is quite concerned. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Ethan. Please show her in, Harrison. Catherine entered moments later, worry evident in her expression. Mother, she said, crossing immediately to Eleanor's side, the formal pretense of their professional relationship abandoned in her concern. Are you all right? James called to tell me that Richard had brought the Meridian County Sheriff here with some ridiculous allegations. I'm fine, Catherine, Eleanor assured her, reaching for her daughter's hand. The situation has been resolved. Richard has agreed to withdraw his challenge to the Foundation and William's will. Catherine looked between Eleanor and Ethan, clearly sensing something significant had transpired. Just like that, after months of legal maneuvers. Sheriff Caldwell was instrumental in helping us reach an understanding with Richard, Eleanor explained, her gaze meeting Ethan's with quiet gratitude. Catherine studied Ethan with new appreciation. Then I owe you my thanks, Sheriff. The Foundation's work means everything to the mother, preserving William's legacy, ensuring Willow Creek remains intact for future generations. Ethan nodded, acknowledging her gratitude. Your mother's determination made the difference. I simply provided support. A look of understanding passed between Catherine and Eleanor, the unspoken communication of two women who shared not only biological connection, but also a fundamental strength of character. Well, Catherine said finally, it seems my early arrival was fortuitous. Perhaps we could review the agenda for tomorrow's meeting now, to save time in the morning. The suggestion was clearly offered to allow Eleanor to rest, a daughter's concern disguised as professional efficiency. An excellent idea, Eleanor agreed, rising carefully. Sheriff, would you mind if we postponed our discussion until this evening? Foundation matters require attention now that Richard's challenge is resolved. Of course, Ethan replied, recognizing her need for time with her daughter. I have some department matters to attend to myself. As he prepared to leave, Eleanor paused by the doorway. "Sheriff, Ethan, thank you. Not just for today, but for these past 5 days. What began as a transaction has become something I didn't anticipate. For me as well," he acknowledged quietly. Hours later, after spending the afternoon at his office catching up on work he'd neglected during the tumultuous events of the week, Ethan returned to Willow Creek as dusk was falling. The grand house glowed with warm light against the gathering darkness, no longer seeming like an alien world, but increasingly like a place where he belonged, at least for now. Harrison informed him that Eleanor was waiting in the library. He found her seated near the fireplace, a small fire crackling despite the mild evening, a concession to the persistent chill that seemed to affect her regardless of the actual temperature. "Catherine has returned to Meridian City," she said as he took the chair opposite hers. "She'll be back for the meeting tomorrow, but I thought it best she didn't stay overnight. Her presence tends to fuel gossip, even now. You didn't tell her about Walter's revelations? About Margaret's connection to her biological father?" Eleanor shook her head. "Some truths only cause pain without providing meaningful understanding. Catherine has built a good life, free from the shadows of those early mistakes. Burdening her with Margaret's tragedy seems unnecessary." Ethan nodded, respecting her decision while wondering if Catherine might someday feel differently about wanting the complete truth. "Patricia called earlier," Eleanor continued. "She's already received assurance from Richard's attorney that all challenges to the will and foundation will be formally withdrawn tomorrow. It seems our resolution is holding." "Good," Ethan said simply. Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "You're different than you were 5 days ago, Sheriff Caldwell, not just in circumstance, but in perspective. Meeting you tends to have that effect." "Mrs. Harrington," he replied with a small smile. "Indeed," she returned his smile before her expression grew more serious. "Our arrangement has fulfilled its initial purpose. Your financial security has been established, and my position regarding Willow Creek is now secure. Yet I find myself hoping you might consider staying beyond our original terms." The invitation caught him by surprise. "You want me to remain as your husband, even with Richard's challenge resolved?" "Yes," she said simply. "Not out of necessity, but by choice. These past days have shown me the value of having someone I can trust beside me, especially as my health continues to decline." She held up a hand to forestall his response. "I don't ask out of romantic notions. At 73, with a failing heart, such considerations are long past. But companionship, mutual respect, shared purpose, these have value beyond our initial transaction." Ethan considered her offer carefully. 5 days ago, he would have seen this only in terms of financial benefit, continued security, the eventual inheritance. Now he found himself weighing different factors: respect for this remarkable woman, commitment to the legacy she protected, and yes, a growing sense of belonging at Willow Creek that had nothing to do with its material value. "I'd like that," he said finally, "to stay, to help you manage whatever comes next, to see the foundation's work secured." Relief flickered across Eleanor's features. "Thank you. William would be pleased by this outcome, I think. He valued integrity above all qualities, the willingness to stand by one's commitments even when circumstances change." As the fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting warm light across the room, filled with generations of books and memories, Ethan reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. What had begun as financial desperation had transformed into something neither he nor Eleanor could have anticipated. A partnership built not on romance or even friendship initially, but on mutual respect and shared purpose. The broken sheriff and the judge's widow had found in each other something rare in a world that often valued appearances over substance. authentic connection forged through crisis, strengthened by truth, and sustained by the recognition that some legacies transcend the individuals who create them. Outside the library windows, Willow Creek's grounds lay peaceful in the gathering darkness, the legacy of generations preserved for the future. Within, two people from vastly different worlds had found common ground in their commitment to protecting what mattered, not just property or position, but the principles that gave both meaning. 5 days had changed everything, and whatever time remained, whether the 2 years Eleanor's doctors predicted or something shorter or longer, would be faced not as a business arrangement, but as a genuine partnership, unexpected in its origins, but no less valuable for how it began. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.